Across Asia, food shortages, hoarding and fears of social unrest are haunting regional governments. The food crisis is raising major questions about development, agriculture and globalization policies in the region. And with no end in sight to soaring prices, the need for action is increasingly urgent. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East, we ask, how should Asia tackle the global food crisis? For Asia's poor, the most significant commodity is rice. And as world prices soar, the rice bowls are emptying. Across the region, nations are exploring ways to handle the crisis. And in Malaysia, this means ramping up production on a huge scale. Fauzia Ibrahim reports.
It's been a relatively good year for Malaysia's rice industry. But these farmers from Sekinchan, south of Kuala Lumpur, do not see any reason to celebrate.
Yes, it's true. The price of rice has gone up, but the yield hasn't increased. It all depends on the weather. Years ago, we could yield 20 tons. Now, we're lucky to get 7 tons. The government's subsidy for fertilizers is not enough. We have to top it up, and the price of fertilizers has gone up tremendously.
For the last 56 years, Chong Wan Hon has been working his family's rice fields. Depending on the harvest, Wan Hon earns about $250 a month from his 5 acres. But at age 61, and with no one to help him with the back-breaking work, Wan Hon is ready to put down his farming tools.
Only people aged 50 and above are working as farmers. Young people don't want to work as farmers. The income is not enough. The income is not even $300 a month. Of course they don't want to be farmers.
Wan Hon and several other Sekinchan farmers are ready to sell their land, but at a good price. They're lobbying the government to convert their collective 84 acres into an industrial zone, attracting factories and mills to the town.
If we sell the land as rice paddies, we will get $12,000 per acre. If it is converted to an industrial area, it will go up to $60,000. So we can take that money and do whatever we want with it. We can live easier lives. We work so hard now, but we don't have enough money to live on.
Many rice farmers in Malaysia feel the same way. For years, they've watched palm oil and rubber become the nation's economic backbone. Educated youths have left family farms for better prospects in cities. Malaysia's farmers have been left behind by the nation's booming industrial progress.
We give too much priorities for palm oil, and it seems that we didn't give proper guidance to the farmers. We ignore the importance of growing rice for the population, because so far we can buy rice at a cheaper or acceptable price, and thus we feel that it's better to buy rice than to grow rice.
Malaysia grows 70% of its domestic rice consumption, with the other 30% imported from Thailand and Vietnam. But this year's record rice prices saw Malaysia scrambling to secure adequate supplies. Realizing the need for more self-sufficiency, the government has set aside nearly $250 million to increase domestic rice production. Undeveloped land in Sabah and Sarawak has been earmarked for rice cultivation. Environmentalists, however, warn Sarawak's ecosystem is not suitable.
Peatland is not very good for any kind of cultivation, especially wet paddy cultivation. And mangroves too, if you were to strip off the mangroves, then you have other kinds of secondary problems which come up with it. You know, loss of biodiversity is one of them, and changing of the ecosystem, which will be a forever thing.
Even if the land provides a good yield, labour will also be an issue. With no young farmers coming through to replace people like Wan Hon, the question is just who will tend the nation's rice bowl.
Joining me now are from New York, Professor Michael Spence, Nobel Prize-winning economist from Stanford University. In New Delhi, Dr. Vandana Shiva, physicist, ecologist and author. And here in Kuala Lumpur, Rajat Nag is Managing Director of the Asian Development Bank. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Rajat Nag, let me begin with you, if I might. Here in Asia, we're already hearing stories of trouble, perhaps even crisis, certainly some shortage. How bad is it? How bad is it going to get?
I think it's quite bad. It's not going to get better soon. And I think it's important to recognize that the era of cheap food is over. And I think countries around the region have to respond to it proactively. Otherwise, the situation will be serious, as you imply.
Here we've had, we still have the horrors of the '97 Asian crisis hanging over everybody's psyche. Could it be that bad?
I don't think so. I don't think we'll see a repeat of the Asian financial crisis. I think the institutions are now much more robust. But I think it's very important to recognize that for the first time since 1973, we are into a double whammy situation. High oil prices, high food prices. And high food prices, I think, are much more serious than the high oil prices.
Michael Spence, why is it that in the 21st century, where economics is such a developed, such a highly pursued science, that we are still apparently incapable of explaining what's going on and why?
Well, food and energy are slightly different. I think on the energy and oil front, it's a simple failure to anticipate the effect of high growth in the developing world. Yeah, in food, it's biofuels, droughts, and lack of incentives to increase productivity in agriculture in a very wide range of the world.
Vandana Shiva, is it quite so dry and scientific? Is it a matter of markets and technology?
Well, I think food is one area where so many economic laws actually get violated systematically, including the law of supply and demand. The rise in food prices is absolutely out of sync with the actual supply situation. And it is much more a result of a factor today's economists don't take into account: power, control, and monopoly. If there's one thing that has moved the food prices up, it's the integration of the global food system in the hands of 4 or 5 agribusiness traders who are now betting on rising prices, and joining them are investors and hedge funds. That's the real reason of price rise.
Challenging words indeed. Michael Spence, let me get your response to that.
I think the food situation is largely right now a supply shock. And I expect that with an appropriate response on the supply side, we can actually restore some semblance of normality over a period of 2 to 3 years. In the meantime, we have an emergency that has to be dealt with both within countries and multinationally with respect to the poor, who've effectively had their incomes dropped by a factor of as much as 50%.
But Rajat Nag, why supply shock? Where is this shock coming from?
I think Professor Spence is correct. I think their supply shock has come from the fact that there has not been enough productivity increases. I think we probably declared victory on the Green Revolution perhaps too soon. There have been weather disruptions, droughts in Australia, cyclones in various parts of the continent. I think it is also true, though, there have been demand factors, and demand has increased in many parts of the world, certainly India and China, increased incomes, increased demand. But biofuels, I think the emphasis on biofuels that has been placed in parts of the world have had quite a serious impact. And what Dr. Shiva says, I think, is also a factor, but I would agree with Dr. Spence. It is an element, but I wouldn't put the burden of the situation on that alone.
Well, let's get more from Vandana Shiva. I mean, your suggestion... Go ahead.
Well, you know, there's been actually, between last year and this year, a 4% increase in food production. In India, we've had about 4 million tons increase of rice and wheat, and yet the prices keep going up. We've opened up areas that were never under cultivation: the Amazon, the Indonesian and Malaysian rainforests. We're producing so much. The problem is, that much is no more only about food, it's about commodities. And unless we see these mutations in the food system, unless we see that the same soya can go to make cattle feed and can go to run a car with biodiesel, we're never ever going to be able to address this problem.
Let's just...
The other, I do want to add, Dr. Spence talked about the oil and energy crisis as separate from the food crisis. They are not. Today's industrial agriculture, including the Green Revolution, is really an oil-based, fossil fuel-based agriculture. With rising oil prices, it's inappropriate, first and foremost, because rising oil prices means a tripling of fertilizer prices, means the poor get knocked out because increasing costs make agriculture viable. Farmers in India have been shot dead. But the climate change factors that my fellow economists are talking about, the drought and floods, are also related to cultivation with fossil fuels. 25% emissions are coming from agriculture and industrial agriculture.
Let me stop you there for a second.
Unless we stop the problems.
Let me stop you there for a second. I want to focus in on just one of the points that you made and put it to Michael Spence. You said that it's a supply shock. Apparently the supply of food in the world is going up, it's not going down. How do you address that?
Well, I mean, the supply of food in parts of the world is going up, and I agree with the point about demand increasing somewhat. But most of us eat most of the time. The supply shock is associated with the droughts, the lack of productivity increases in many of the African countries.
But how can there be a supply shock if there is more food?
A supply shock doesn't mean, at least the way I use it, a supply shock doesn't mean an actual precipitous decline. It means a failure to grow in relation to demand. But let me just add, I mean, the biofuels is a potentially very serious diversion of food supply into another use.
All right, well, let's pause it there for a minute, because the actual use of land and the diversion of resources into various areas is part of the broader argument which we want to get into. We'll have to take a short break first. Do stay with us. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes when we'll also hear about how the global food crisis is affecting some schools in Cambodia. Stay with us.